Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah from Life with Miss H, and this is our first Math Monday. So these videos will just be for my students, for other students around the country or the state of Kentucky, and their parents to help them with these concepts that we are going over in class. And my students are getting ready to have a test coming up, so I thought, why not start with decimals? So today we're going to look at all things decimals, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So let's get started. Okay, so today we are looking at all things decimals, and we're going to look at adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. A lot of people are intimidated by decimals, but they are my favorite. So let's get started. So first we're going to look at adding and subtracting decimals. So the big key things to remember here is to always line up your decimals. When you line those up, you might have some missing spots, so that's when you can add zeros as needed. Sometimes you don't have to, sometimes you will. And then after you line them up, all you have to do is add and subtract normally. So let's look at some examples. So this is adding decimals. So this first example, we're going to line up our decimals. Now these do have different numbers of digits. So the key thing here, line up our decimals. And we are adding. So in these spots above these digits in our hundredths and thousandths place, we can add zeros. When we're adding, it's not really necessary. My students like to do that just to make it pretty and help them. So let's start adding normally now that we have added or lined up our decimals. So 0 plus 5, 5. 0 plus 6 is 6. 4 plus 3 is 7. I can bring my decimal straight down. Then 6 plus 2 is 8. And 1, and then a 1. Now, a common question that I get from my students is, does it matter which one goes on the top, which one goes on the bottom? And I always tell them, due to the commutative property of addition, it doesn't matter. I can put whatever number on top, whatever number on bottom, my sum will always be the same. So let's start with the second example. Now, this 24 does not have a decimal in it, and this throws some of my students off. So when that happens, if it is a whole number, it is a rule that the decimal just goes right behind the whole number. So when we're lining it up, make sure that those decimals are lined up. That my ones places with my ones place, my tens places with my tens place. I can add zeros here if I want to. Again, with addition, it's not very necessary. So 2 plus 0 is 2, 7 plus 0 is 7. Bring my decimal straight down. 1 plus 4 is 5. 3 plus 2 is 5. And then we bring our 1 down. So that is adding decimals. Now, let's look at an example of subtracting decimals. So, key thing again, line up our decimals. So in this case, we do have a missing spot here. With subtracting, it is necessary to put a 0. Now, this is where it gets very confusing for my students. We like to, I call it borrowing because I'm old school. A lot of people call it regrouping. So we're going to now make this 0 a 10, this 1 a 0. So now we can subtract the 10 from the 2 because we originally could not take 2 from 0. So now we can do 10 minus 2, which is 8. Now here, now that we have borrowed from this 1, we can't take 9 from 0. So we have to actually borrow from this 5 as well. Now we can make that a 10. And now 10 subtract 9 is 1. bring our decimal straight down, and then our 4. Same question from my students. Doesn't matter which one goes on top, which one goes on bottom. In this case, it definitely does matter. The first number in our problem has to go on top. The second number has to go on bottom. So let's do the second example. Again, we're lining up our decimals, our place values. In this case, we don't have to add a 0, but we can, just to stay consistent, add a 0 there. So 5 subtract 0 is 5. 1 subtract 1 is 0. Now in this case, it is so important to bring that decimal straight down, because if we didn't and just left it as decimal 5, that would be 5/10, which is a huge difference between, if you think of it as money, 50 cents is a huge difference from 5 cents. Now, going on to multiplying decimals. So multiplying decimals, the key thing is to multiply normally. You don't even have to line up your decimals, and you ignore the decimals at the beginning, just using that common algorithm of multiplying decimals. So then after you do multiply and you find your product, you need to count how many decimal places are behind the decimal in your question. So once you find the total places there, you need to move your decimal from in your product from right to left, the amount of places that you count in your question. So let's look at some examples. So another, going back to that question of my students, doesn't matter what goes on top, what goes on bottom. It doesn't, due to the commutative property of multiplication. So let's set these problems up. Okay, so now that we have set our problem up, notice that I did not line up the decimals. So now I'm going to just start multiplying normally. So 9 times 2 is 18. We carry our 1. 9 times 0 is 0 plus the 1. 9 times 4 is 36. Put my 6 down, carry my 3. 9 times 6 is 54 plus 3 is the 57. So now I'm finished with these. So I always like to tell my students, mark them out so you don't get confused later. I'm also finished multiplying that 9. So now that I have one place marked out here, I do have to put a placeholder. I always draw a line through my 0. That way I know that that is a placeholder. So if I have to go back and I have to erase things and restart, I know that I can leave that there because it is just a placeholder. So now I'm going to start with my 1. So 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 6 is 6. So now I'm finished with that 1. Now that I have 2 places marked out, I need to add 2 placeholders. Now I start with my 5. So 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 0 is 0. Plus 1 is 1. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 6 is 30 plus 2. So now that I have multiplied all of my numbers, I'm going to add. So 8 plus 0 is 8. 1 plus 2 plus 0 is 3. 6 plus 0 is 6. So 7 plus 4 plus 1 is 13. 6 plus 5 plus 1 is 11. 12, I'm sorry, it is 12. 1 plus 2 is 3, and then I do not have anything to add to my 3. Now, here's where the major thing when you are multiplying decimals comes into play. So here, I can count 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 numbers behind that place value. Here, there are 3 numbers behind that decimal. Here, there is 1 decimal number behind the decimal. So now that I have 4 total places behind the decimal, in my product, I need to start at the right, and I'm going to move to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, I always tell my students to come down, rewrite it without my little, what I call bunny hops, just so it looks pretty, and it's easier for the reader to see the answer. Now, here's where the commutative property of multiplication will come into play. Preferably the smaller number I like to put on the bottom, because that means I don't have to multiply that many places. So I'm going to put the 311 and 4/10 on the top, and I'm going to multiply by 7 and 5/10. Notice my decimals are lined up in this case, but it's not necessary. So 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. I'm finished with that 2. I'm also finished multiplying by 5. So I put my placeholder since I have one place marked out. Now I'm going to work with my 7. So 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 2 is 9. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 3 is 21. The key thing with multiplication is you have to keep your numbers lined up. So 0 plus 0 is 0. 8 plus 7 is 15. 1 plus 5 plus 9 is 15. 7 plus 5 plus 1 is 13. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. And then 2. Now here I have one number behind the decimal place. I have one number behind the decimal place. So in my product, I'm going to need 2 places behind the decimal. So I do use my bunny hops. My decimal is going to be here. I have 2 numbers behind the decimal. So I do like to rewrite it just so it is pretty and easy to read. Now, let's move on to dividing decimals. So first we're going to look at dividing decimals by whole numbers. So the big thing is you just have to bring your decimal straight up from your dividend to your quotient. So divide normally. I always tell my students, does McDonald's serve cheeseburgers? And that just kind of stands for divide, multiply, subtract, check. That's a big step. And then you can bring down. So now, let's look at some examples. So, the first number in a division problem is your dividend. The second number is your divisor. So let's put our dividend, and then we are going to divide by our divisor. So here's our decimal. We're going to bring it straight up to where we would have our quotient. So 4 can't go into 3. So you can put a 0, you don't have to. Then we go on to 4 into 39, which would be 9. And then we multiply, so that is divide. Then we multiply, so 9 times 4 is 36. Then I subtract, so that would be 3. Check. Now that check process is you look at your difference here after you subtracted, and you compare it to your divisor. If it is smaller than your divisor, you're great, you're golden, you can bring down your next number. But if it is larger, that means your quotient number needs to change. So in this case, I do have a remainder of 3. Now when we're dividing decimals, we don't like remainders. We can simply add a 0 because it does not change our number. And then we can bring down our 0. So now we say, how many times can 4 go into 30? And that would be 7 times. So then now I multiply. 7 times 4 is 28. Then I subtract. 30 subtract 28 is 2. Check, is 2 all right to have? Yes, because it is less than our divisor. So in this case, I do have another remainder. So I need to add a 0, bring it down. Now, 5 can go into 20. 4 can go into 20 5 times. Now 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, and I get 0. So I am finished with this problem. So now we're looking at 4 and 1600ths divided by 4. So I'm going to put my dividend and my divisor. I'm going to bring my decimal straight up into my quotient. So now 4 can go into 4 one time. 1 times 4 is 4. I subtract and I get 0. Check, 0 is okay to have. It is less than 4. So I can bring down my 1. Now 4 can't go into 1. You can't have any groups of 4 with just 1. So in that case, I have to put a 0 above the 1. That's telling me that there is no, it cannot go into it. So I still have to follow through with that step of divide, multiply, subtract, check, it is okay to have 1, and then I can bring down my 6. So now I'm going to divide 16 by 4. 16 divided by 4 is 4. Multiply, 4 times 4 is 16. Subtract. Now that I don't have any other number to bring down, I don't have any remainders, I'm finished. And our last thing of this video, we're dividing decimals by decimals. In this case, you do have 2 extra steps. The first thing you need to do is you need to move the decimal in your divisor all the way to the right. When you do that, you need to count those places because that's when you know how many places to move your decimal in your dividend. And you move that to the right. Now, there might be times that you might have to add zeros. Just make sure that you have zeros to fill in those places so you can move your decimal. Then you bring your decimal straight up into your quotient from your dividend and then divide normally. So let's look at some examples. So we're dividing decimals by decimals. So again, this is going to be my dividend. This will be my divisor. So let's put our dividend and my divisor. Now, we're going to have to move our decimal in our divisor all the way to the right. In this case, it's just one place. So in my dividend, I'm going to have to move the decimal one place and bring it straight up. So now instead of dividing by 2 and 1/10, I'm going to be dividing by 21. So can 21 go into 1? Nope. So we need to move over to the 19. Can 21 go into 19? No. So that's when we need to go over to the 5, which can 21 go into 195? Yes, it can. So let's look at how many times. I'm going to say 9. Now the 9 will go above the 5 because I'm dividing that 195. So 9 times 21 would be 189. If that doesn't come to you naturally, you can come to the side. My students like doing this. And multiplying. 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. So then I'm subtracting. We're going to follow the same rules of divide, multiply, subtract, check, bring down. So now I'm going to subtract. 195 subtract 189 is 6. So is it okay to have 6? Yes, it is less than 21. So I'm going to bring down my 1. Now how many times can 21 go into 61? It can go twice. 2 times 21 is 42. Subtract, and I do get 19. So check, is it okay? Yes. But do I have any other numbers to bring down? Currently I don't. So that's when I have to add a 0. And then I can bring it down. How many times can 21 go into 190? It can go into it 9 times. So then 9 times 21, we saw up here that it is 189. Subtract, and it is 1. I don't have any other numbers, so I can add another 0 and then bring it down. Because I checked 21 and 1, it is okay. I bring down my 0. Now here, can 21 go into 10? It can't. So I have to put a 0 in my quotient. And then I can multiply, subtract. Now, in this case, I tell my students it's okay to stop. They're in 6th grade. They don't have to continue. Now, you can continue adding zeros and dividing as far as you'd like. So I am stopping with this question. All right, going to our last example of this video. So I am going to put my dividend and my divisor. Now, in this case, I have to move my decimal 2 places. Now here, I don't have a decimal in my problem. So I can add a decimal behind the 7 because a whole number always has a decimal behind it. We just don't always put it. Now I can move my decimal 2 places. I have these empty spots here. So that's where I need to add zeros. And then I bring it straight up. So now, can 25 go into 7? It can't. So can 25 go into 70? 2 times. So 2 times 25 is 50. Subtract. Check. It is okay. It is less than 25. Bring down my 0. Can 25 go into 200? And my students like to think of money, especially when they see that 25. It's just a quarter. So I like to say, how many quarters do you have in $2? And in this case, it would be 8. 8 times 25 is 200. Subtract. And I do not have a remainder. I don't have any other numbers to bring down. So 28 is my quotient. Thank you for watching my first video with Life with Miss H. If you liked it, hit that red subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up. I hope this helped you. I hope this helps the parents, the moms, the dads, anybody that's active in a student's life. I hope it helps my students review for their test. So I hope we see you on Friday for Family Fridays. My plan right now is to post on Mondays and Fridays. Mondays will be Math Mondays, Fridays will be Family Fridays. And that's when you'll get to see my daughter Lacey. So just be looking forward to that video, and we will see you Friday.